Very good morning and welcome to the CNBC Africa special, coming to you live from the sidelines of the World Economic Forum on Africa here in Cape Town for 2019. Well, this time around, we take a look at industrial development zones. But not just any kind of IDZ, one that is actually located within the northeastern part of the KZN province here in South Africa, which hosts a lot of economic potential to bolster the performance of South Africa's economic performance and the participation of its citizens within these environments. Today, we delve further into the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone and really analyze how this ties in with development finance objectives and, of course, some of the supporting infrastructure that's required to make it a great success. We've got a wonderful audience with us here today who will also be interacting and sharing insight with us, and two phenomenal panelists who will be giving us details and insight into the Richards Bay IDZ and, of course, further details as to how we can use this as a case study and example to expand, excel, and continue to prosper, not only industrial development zones, but special economic zones as well, as they are key contributors to economic growth and success. I'd like to start off by introducing my panelists. So let's start off to my left with Smangele Ngcobo, Acting Chief Executive Officer of the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, joined on stage by Mohan Vivekanandan. He's a Group Executive, Origination and Coverage for the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Lady and gent, a great pleasure to have you both today. And it's a real interesting conversation we're going to have, because so often we get caught up in the numbers and the figures of development finance, understanding the impact that it needs to have on the ground, more from an economics context. But this time around, we'll also engage not only in the economics, the financing, but also the social understanding of industrial development zones. Smangele, you've got an amazing job at your hands. A project that was essentially launched back in 2002, and as an industrial development zone, hosting a number of economic opportunities from manufacturing, agro-processing, technology, as well as oil and gas. Tell us more specifically about the developments that have come through since the launch of the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone since 2002.
Okay, thank you so much. So we are part of, as the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, we are part of the SEZ, which is a national program under the Department of Trade and Industries. This whole program basically is to ensure that we attract the right kind of investments in terms of ensuring that they are investments which are sustainable, which will bring economic growth into our country, into our region, specifically the Richards Bay area. However, not just the area, but contributing to the province, the whole province, and the South Africa as a whole. Not only economic growth and development, but also contributing to our people in terms of job opportunities and job creation. So we have a lot of incentives that we offer, which we'll speak on at a later stage during this program. However, since launching of our SEZ, it has been a long journey, a very interesting one. Our key focus is around manufacturing, processing. So most of our projects that we find projects which at feasibility, which need feasibility study, where they are testing and developing technologies of improving processes. So you find that there are different stages of their project. It's not only that; it's your investment in heavy, medium to heavy industry, which also require your EIA processes. So we have a lot of interesting investments in our pipeline, as well as that have landed, that are already operational around your pipe manufacturing, your heavy machinery. We have oil refinery coming through.
Yes.
We have been busy with oil and gas feasibility studies because we believe that Richards Bay is going to be an oil and gas hub, particularly in the oil space, but we're not leaving the gas out of it as well. So there's quite a lot of interesting things, different investments that are coming through, which you will see in future coming to life. Yes. So it's still, in different stages. So it has been an interesting journey.
I can imagine, and I guess you've certainly highlighted a number of areas of interest, which certainly are positive indicators for anyone looking to see economic growth. But what has made the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone different in comparison to other investment initiatives of this nature?
Why we are different is our location mainly. the Richards Bay, besides the lifestyle, we have a beautiful weather conditions. It's a balance. So even if you move your family to Richards Bay area, you get all your good schools. If you have a family, we have good restaurants, we have private hospitals. So the whole lifestyle around Richards Bay area. We have an airport which is being expanded, so major projects in the area. However, the key element is the fact that we are very close to the port, so which is aligned to our mandate. So what we seek to do is to ensure that we don't only export our raw materials to foreign countries, we attract the investments, your domestic and foreign investments into South Africa to promote manufacturing. Instead of exporting our raw materials or commodities, we attract investments into South Africa to develop the products in South Africa to improve your manufacturing and improve and increase exports. So that is our key focus.
Yes.
So less import, more exportation, and more manufacturing in the area. So we're very close to the port.
That gets us excited because it means that we're basically building a baby China here. The more products that you actually move outside of your country, the better for the economy. Mohan, I want us to put this within the context of development finance, because a lot of us might be sitting here thinking, okay, oil and gas, agro-processing, manufacturing, that sounds like heavy work. But take us back to the basics of how this is aligned with economic strategies and developing special economic zones to really try to bring about a change in society, in the economics of not only the KZN province, but South Africa as a whole.
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity, for the DBSA to participate. From our side, we are a national development bank that's focused around infrastructure, financing, and also project development. So, Smangile spoke about doing the feasibility studies as well, not just the financing. We provide all of those types of resources, both for public entities and for private entities, primarily focused, though, on the infrastructure sectors. We're part of a development finance ecosystem in South Africa that's quite well developed. So you've got ourselves, you've got the Industrial Development Corporation, which focus a lot on the industrial side, manufacturing, mining as well, and we work very closely with them. You've got the Land and Agricultural Bank that's focusing on, the agricultural sectors and a number of other DFIs as well, including a provincial development finance institution like Itala that we work closely with as well,
yes.
That being, the one for KZN. To answer your question, obviously, ultimately the goal from the National Development Plan for 2030, is about creating a more prosperous society, improving the well-being of the people of South Africa. Special economic zones, industrial development zones play a very crucial role in that because we do need to create job opportunities. We need to boost, we need to industrialize more as well. I think we know we're blessed with a lot of natural resources in the country, but we don't always develop them to the full amount. And so having these types of institutions that are adding value to the economy is very, very important.
Yeah.
Because, you have that secondary element, and then on top of that will then be an entire services economy as well that can flourish around it.
I'm glad that you highlight that because it certainly does set the basis for the conversation, that it goes beyond just finding a pretty spot somewhere in a coastal area that has great living conditions, as Smangile has already told us, and saying, I like this spot. It can be an industrial development zone. It takes a lot more additional infrastructure development to actually support the outcomes that are needed there. What does that mean from a development finance point of view? And are there examples as well that you can share with us that the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone has actually had to invest in, to empower on, to connect it to the port, to the airport, the role as well as real infrastructure? Mohan?
Yeah, I think, as we know, Durban is the leading port, in the country and even in the continent. But there's always need for additional, trading spots, right? One of the things we've been noticing is that given its proximity to Gauteng, actually, the port of Maputo is really taking off. And I think, based on the various road and rail infrastructure that's now connecting South Africa into that part of Mozambique. And I think, similarly, there's a huge opportunity for Richards Bay. And already, it's one of the leading ports in the country as well. We know that, for instance, the coal terminal that's already one of the largest, if not the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, so on and so forth. But what we're seeing, for instance, is, an example of some very tangible projects. There's a program we're working on with Transnet and with Eswatini Rail around freeing up some of the rail lines in that part. So northern KZN, Eswatini going into Mpumalanga and all the way up to Limpopo as well.
That's amazing for trade and movement of goods.
Yeah, because I think there is a need for more investments in the rail infrastructure, but ultimately, they'll come through and connect into the Port of Richards Bay and to the industrial development zone. And there's still a lot of, for instance, minerals and agriculture, from all the way from Limpopo, for instance, where we need to unlock the infrastructure to enable them to come through. But to give you an idea of where we are with it, it's not in the financing stage, it's in the pre-financing stage. So Transnet themselves have put a lot of money into doing the feasibility studies around this, but there's more funding that's needed. So ourselves, the Industrial Development Corporation, are looking at putting feasibility funding into these projects. But also even other entities, for instance, we work closely with the African Development Bank, and which is the Pan-African Development Finance Institution.
Yes.
And they're also looking at putting funding into the project. I was at an earlier panel where we were discussing project preparation with the African Export-Import Bank, Afrexim Bank. And this is an area that Afrexim Bank would also be very keen to support, and they've also set up some similar facilities. So as development banks, we focus on infrastructure, but you've got the IDC that focuses on the manufacturing and those sectors. But there are entities like Afrexim Bank that will want to promote trade as well. So they would we could also bring them in because we work very closely with them on a number of projects on the continent.
On the infrastructure and additional support, because that's essentially what's going to make this IDZ propel.
Definitely. Talking of infrastructure development, when we say we are, as the Richards Bay IDZ, are attracting your domestic and foreign direct investments, we see ourselves playing, in fact, even our logo says we're a gateway to the world, playing in the global space. So we make sure that the infrastructure that we bring into our zones, we've got two land parcels, which we have one has been purchased, the other one is in the process of transfer. So what we do, we identify strategic land, and we bring what we call world-class infrastructure into our land to make sure that whichever investor comes into our zone has got a land to manufacture their plants, which has got the right kind of civil infrastructure, your civil engineering infrastructure, your electric, your security, your water piping systems, everything having been installed. All you do, you come, you erect your plants, and basically you procure your machinery, and on you go. So we make it easy. It's part of us making sure that we make business easy, investment easy, so that basically we ensure our projects, our investors, when they come, they have all the right kind of resources already in the zone. So besides the infrastructure development and the funding we get mostly through the DTI, however, because we see ourselves as partners with our investors, when they need further funding, because what we do besides the infrastructure in the land, we have funding around your top structures, which is done also through the DTI. Further funding, we do link our investors with the different DFIs in terms of ensuring that they provide them with that additional and top-up funding as well. So it's quite key, the close relationship, because we don't only deal with them. We rely heavily on all of our stakeholders, and we take the likes of your DBSA, your IDCs, your ITALAs as our key stakeholders, because we don't leave our investors hanging. The minute we see they're in this stage, we connect them to the right institutions.
Smangile and Mohan, I'd like us to use the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone as a key case study to really understand some of the challenges, because just given the amount of infrastructure that's described here, given the level of partnerships, as well as making sure that you follow through with your investors' needs and requirements, this can be a very heavy exercise and very stressful, and one that can be met with challenges. What were some of the experiences in rolling out the efficacy of the required infrastructure and support and participation that's often required?
Our major one is the own contribution element, especially around our local entrepreneurs.
Own contribution meaning?
Own contribution meaning if you need funding of 100 million, you need to have 5 million or 10 million. The own contribution from our DFIs, normally the percentage is lesser than your commercial banks.
Okay.
So that is the biggest challenge, is the funding. However, there are different grants that are also offered. However, we've got a lot of applicants that are heading towards those programs like your BIS programs, which
BIS
is used.
stands for?
Black Industrialist. It's a black industrialist scheme.
Fantastic.
Which is a grant through the DTI, up to 50 million. That grant is used as your own contribution. However, there are many applicants going through that system as well to ensure that you eventually qualify and get that kind of funding. So that's where sometimes we get these challenges to say, some of our entrepreneurs, they don't have that startup sort of capital so that they can then access the different funds from your DFIs. That has been the main challenge. Mm-hmm. However, for your foreign investors, most of them, they come with their own funding. So it's just a matter of us making sure that we walk through with them in that entire process. The challenge that side is the resources. Sometimes there is a lot that needs to be done, but not enough hands and not enough hours in a day. So those are the major challenges that we face. But with the relationships that we create around our stakeholders, we do try and manage those situations.
Yeah, there are two themes that I do want to follow up on, being partnership and, of course, the money. Mohan, I'm talking about money, and I'm looking at you, right? Given that you're representing a DFI here, and you even mentioned earlier that the railway investment and feasibility study that's being created between Maputo as well as Richards Bay, if I'm not mistaken, is something that's still in the pre-feasibility study. There are long lead times when it comes to development finance as well as infrastructure projects related to industrial development zones. Is that still a challenge? Is that something that might actually hamper the development and fast-tracking of industrial development zones like Richards Bay?
I mean, it is true. I mean, I think one of the comments that we make around the financing of infrastructure, both in South Africa but the rest of the continent as well, is that there is a lot of financing that's available, from ourselves, development banks, but commercial banks, and even institutional investors that are looking for yield, which infrastructure type projects provide. Mm-hmm. But the challenge is, to get to a position where you do have the right sets of projects, that have gone through that full development cycle, and it does take time. But I think the flip side of that is you do want to follow through that process, because that ensures then that you've got a good, sustainable project that ultimately will be able to, enhance the economy. If it's done on a public-private basis, then, there's a way to ensure that it can be paid back as well, even if it needs, a longer time period, for instance. So you're right, getting a project to feasibility, to bankability, and then construction does take time. But, you're thinking about an asset that could have 30, 50-year life, if not longer, some cases, right?
Yeah. So
it's not necessarily that bad to be able to spend a bit of time. But obviously, you don't want it to drag out too much. But a lot of that is also driven by, the role of governments around having, policies in place that are clear so that the investors know, what are the different challenges? There are issues. I mean, we did speak about, for instance, the environmental studies, the social impact studies that need to be done. But, those can be done in a relatively, I wouldn't say quickly, but they can be done, within a feasible time period.
Yeah.
And then, what we do is we typically would come in and generally fund up to half of the feasibility studies. So we want to make sure that the sponsor is, has skin in the game, and they're putting their own capital and their own resources into also doing that early work.
Similar to the own capital investment as Mangele had.
Skin in the game.
Makes
their
sense.
Own contribution.
But also the good thing is, because ultimately we're there to put in long-term financing into the project. So what we do is we also make sure that in that phase that the projects the studies have been done to a quality where ourselves and our commercial banking partners will come in and provide the financing needed to build this infrastructure. And some of them, you're talking about an oil refinery, they're some of the ones we've been involved in. We're looking at funding in a refinery in Nigeria, and the total capex there is about $10-11 billion. Oof. So it's very, very significant. There's another one we're looking at in Uganda, which is about $3 to $4 billion. So there's significant amounts of money, and so that work does need to be done, and we need to to be able to source that amount of money from capital markets, both in South Africa and globally. They're going to want to see the fact that that all the work's been done.
Yeah, investors do want a return on their money. Stakeholders also want to see positive outcomes to the changes that we look to bring about in the communities and environments that we serve. I think, again, coming back to Richards Bay and actually exploring various markets and opportunities that exist here, there's a myriad of sectors that Richards Bay IDZ is also looking into. As you mentioned, the key focus is manufacturing as well as processing for the beneficiation of local goods that are made here. But give us a quick overview as to how this actually ties into unlocking so much more opportunity, especially given that we are moving or currently in the fourth industrial revolution.
Definitely. So different sectors is your agro-processing, your renewable energy, your ICT technologies. So all the, the fun, I would say fun, yes. Sectors that sort of your ICT, definitely technology links with the 4IR, because as the IDZ, we believe that with the move in technology, we should be moving as an organization as well. Our investors must be at par as well with the 4IRs, because it brings efficiency. With any efficiency, it results in your improved bottom line as a business. Mm-hmm. So it unlocks a lot of opportunities, not only for the major role players, which is our investors, however, with our entrepreneurs in the area, our SMMEs, because we look for those benefits in terms of how they benefit, instead of the investor sourcing their raw materials for production purposes from abroad. We look locally. Is there no other raw materials that they can find locally to boost our local businesses as well? We ensure that the skills gap in the area is sort of closed through those the investments that are coming through. If they're bringing special or expertise of sorts, and we don't have, we partner with local universities to make sure that our young people are sort of geared towards learning and improving their skills, so that by the time the project is operationalized, they don't source their technical team from overseas, but they get from our people. Yeah. So that's how we try and make sure that we link to address your social ills.
And I think that's a very important point that you make before we go back to actually exploring the various sectors and industries and how they contribute to economic diversity and prosperity, is the fact that it's not just about big business. I think recently in the news headlines, Rio Tinto just came in and invested well over $400 million, which is a significant contribution, but there's space for entrepreneurs as well. And that's fundamentally what we want as well. Definitely. How are you also capitalizing on this and really paying it forward to entrepreneurs around the area?
Yeah, it just says, those major investment coming in the area, it says Richards Bay is an attractive place to do business. We are open for business. We are ready. We welcome the investments. So we leverage off that to make sure that the suppliers, the local businesses in the area, how they can tap into those opportunities. We have annual events where we invite our SMMEs and our investors and let our investors sort of share with our local communities and local entrepreneurs in terms of these are the projects that we're busy with. Mm-hmm. These are the different areas where you can tap into the opportunities so that they all benefit. So that it's not like, it's a project of the IDZ. It's not our project. We are a public entity, making sure that the mandate of the government is realized, that of inclusive economy. So those are some of the different programs that we go out into our local communities and educate them.
And what's the success rate been so far?
It's been quite good. Besides that, even training of our SMMEs to make them ready your enterprise development programs, it's been very good because with the suppliers that are in our database, we also monitor and keep track in terms of how is that sort of connection working in terms of an ongoing relationship with their main investors. Yeah.
So changing the narrative that foreign direct investment just comes and is the scary animal that looks to eat up people's jobs and capitalize on the opportunity. It's actually opening up even more. Exactly. Speaks to the role of development finance there. And I want to segue back to the sectors. You touched on the fact that you're providing these sexy sectors, if I can refer to it as such, in ICT technology involvement. And Mohan, I want to throw this back to you, using the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone yet again as a case study. This diversification of sectors, moving into the technology space, but still having the fundamental oil, gas, manufacturing opportunities that exist there. Does this enhance the attractiveness and the performance of this particular industrial development zone?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think to begin with, our focus had been around provision of bulk infrastructure.
Yes.
That's where we start with. Which is in sectors like making sure that energy needs are there, the transport links, water and sanitation requirements, and then moving into areas like, for instance, telecoms and ICT, so that you've got the broadband connectivity that's needed by businesses to be effective as well. And then from there, we've now moved into even areas like health and education, and funding infrastructure, if we can call it that, in those sectors. For instance, in student housing is an area that we're working on because we know there's a situation where there isn't enough on-campus student housing at tertiary institutions. So we're working with the Department of Higher Education and Training and National Treasury to come up with a program around that area. Similarly, we developed a program for renewable energy, working with the Department of Energy and around the independent power producer program, right, which has been very successful.
Yes.
So those are all, let's say, newer technology areas that we've been involved in. One of the things we're also looking at now to stay relevant is the fact that you spoke about pieces of land. What we're looking at is to say, how do we invest and provide capital on a risk basis for the bulk infrastructure requirements that are needed for developers to come in? Developers ideally don't want to be the ones having to put in the bulk infrastructure, because typically that's the requirement that a municipality would put in. A lot of our municipalities, have so many other requirements that there may be a very valuable piece of land that developers, if it had that infrastructure, would then come in, put in, commercial, residential, others. But so there's a bit of a gap. So we're trying to come up with a solution in that area as well, which is moving us away a little bit from our, from some of the previous bulk infrastructure elements that we've done into those kinds of areas. But I think those are areas that are necessary in South Africa.
Makes a lot of sense, and inviting investors to actually say, look, well, you can actually produce aluminium sheets here, but obviously you need a road to get there. You need additional support structures to move the goods and services that you require. There's something quite critical that we also need to touch on, and of course this goes back to the element of trade, the infrastructure required as well to enhance our partnership with our peers across the continent. We're on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum on Africa. Richards Bay is in KZN, the second largest economic contributor to South Africa, but an even larger contributor as well to the economic prospects across Africa. The Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, and of course the opportunity that this presents. What does it mean for the RBDIZ? What does it mean for the South African economy? And even if we could take the RBDIZ and use that as a case study to implement across many other markets, not only in South Africa, but across the continent, what kind of potential could we look to unlock here?
Yeah, I mean, from our side, I think first of all, it's very exciting that the free trade agreement is in place now, and that the countries are creating what effectively becomes a $3 trillion economy, for trade. So if you think about it, that's larger than, for instance, the economy of India, larger than that of the UK or France. So it's a very large economy, and now, as an investor, you're not just looking at South Africa, which let's say has about a $350 billion economy, but something 10 times that size almost, right? So you've got much bigger scale. But to be able to take advantage of that, you also need the infrastructure. So for instance, if you're putting up a manufacturing facility in Gauteng, as an example, if you don't have the ability to get that product through to the rest of the continent, then you're still only dealing with the smaller economy. So then the full benefits of that free trade area don't come into fruition. So, we're talking about Richards Bay, but obviously, our mandate covers the whole continent. So we're looking at, how do we put in that infrastructure to take advantage of this path-breaking agreement that has come in place. So there's a number of investments that are taking place, for instance, in ports all over the continent, whether in the eastern side in Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, up to Djibouti, and certainly even more so in West Africa, where I think the need for that is even greater. So, for instance, we're involved in similar types of infrastructure in countries like Ghana, and look, in earlier discussions in some other markets as well. I think coming back to Richards Bay, and you spoke about the fact that Richards Bay as a services hub for the oil and gas sector, the DBSA has been involved in putting some into funding into the large natural gas discoveries, and now where the investments in the north of Mozambique.
Yes.
And so given the proximity that Richards Bay has to those, you can definitely see an opportunity to take advantage of that. But you do need to be proactive. You need to be thinking about what are the benefits. I know, for instance, on this side, Cape Town is looking at the same to be a hub for West Africa, for the oil and gas to be sort of a services hub. And so they're looking at making those investments in Saldanha. And I think Richards Bay, needs to be thinking the same.
I want Smangile to come in there to actually tell us if they are thinking the same and how you're capitalizing on this opportunity.
Before. It's been a long process before of planning, because we are not reactive. We identify opportunities, we study trends, we see where the economy is going, where the global effects. And as I was telling you about the study around the oil and gas, that was planned some years back. Also the exploration, trying to find out what's kept coming in the area, it's part of our research as well. As much as we're a landowner and a landlord, but our key focus is around the investment attraction.
Yes.
It's something definitely we have several engagements through the Department of Energy as well.
Yeah.
Your gas exploration, we speak with the relevant people, to keep track of where their research is going, how far they are, how we can plan on our side, how we can make sure that whatever infrastructure is not there, we speak to the relevant people to ensure that they put the right kind of infrastructure, because we want to be ready in all sense. So,
You mentioned the investment attractiveness, and I think for many people who might be watching this or observing and following the conversation on social media, perhaps they can recall the facts and figures that we alluded to, the 11 billion rands worth of investment that's since been plowed into the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone since since the launch in 2002. If they're not encouraged yet, if they aren't motivated just yet, what are the final incentives for them to be mindful of? Top three, keep it tight to 10 seconds.
Top three, we know tax. Tax should be our friend, but tax sometimes can be our enemy. So, which eats into the bottom line. So, one of the bigger advantages of coming into the zone is your discounted tax rate through the SARS system.
Yes.
Your 15%, of course, there are terms and conditions.
Instead of 28%.
Instead of 28%, so you get the 15%. So, our zone, our CCAs, your clearing, customs clearing area, which means anything that comes into the zone is not charged VAT. So there is no VAT charged in the activities that are happening in the zone, as well as your customs duties. Yeah. Only you get charged when you export. What's the other one?
I think that's a great note to leave it off of, because for many investors and anyone in business, the less tax that you can pay legally, the better. We'll leave it there for today, and thank you so much for your time. Certainly gained a lot more incitement into not only the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone and some of the examples and learnings that can be shared, but of course as well development finance and why this can be used as a key example to extrapolate from and encourage the economic growth that we look to derive. A very big thank you to Smangile Ngcobo, who is the Acting Chief Executive Officer of the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, as well as Mohan Vivekanandan, who's a Group Executive for Origination and Coverage at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Of course, our audience as well, who've gained a lot more insight, and of course, you at home for participating in this conversation and also understanding a little bit more about the important economic contribution that's required from industrial development zones in South Africa and beyond the continent.